All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Geographic, and I'll be your host for today. We always get excited around Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants when February rolls along. In February, we kick all the men out for the month, and we host exclusively women in science, adventure, exploration, and conservation. We've had a great start to the month so far. We've had classrooms joining us from all across North America, and we're keeping things going today with our guest speaker. So Anusha Shankar, she is a National Geographic explorer and young leader and a Lewis and Clark Field Scholar. She is broadly interested in how animals manage their energetic needs and studied how hummingbirds budget their energy across a number of field sites in Arizona and Ecuador. Now she's currently a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where she's studying rats that can help us understand seasonal depression in humans better. So Anusha, it's so awesome to have you joining us. We love when we get to steal your time, and we've got some classrooms. We're excited to get to know you a little better today.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. As Joe said, I'm at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I tried to do this last time, but I didn't do it right. Let's try it again. I'll show you. Can you see? There's a lot of snow.
Yeah, we can see. It looks snowy.
So it's, Joe and I were talking, and it's just minus 9 degrees Celsius today, but it's been getting much colder otherwise. And it gets very dark for most of the year. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what I study and how we can understand how humans deal with that. Okay. Let me get my PowerPoint going, and then I want to take a lot of questions after.
All right, that sounds good. And I know it's your first time using Zoom with us, so the share screen is down at the bottom, right in the middle.
Perfect. Okay. You should be seeing that.
All right, looking good. Perfect.
You still see the same one? Okay. So I think we can learn a lot by studying animals and maybe even studying ourselves. And by studying animals that are at the equator, like hummingbirds in Ecuador, and studying animals near the North Pole, like squirrels that my other people in my lab study, or rats, we can understand more things about the world. So let's see what that involves. First, I'll tell you where I come from. This is the city in Chennai that I spent a lot of my childhood in. This is me when I was like 3 years old, a little bit younger than most of you, all of you. So Chennai is in the southeast of India, right at the eastern edge of that triangle that's in the bottom of India. And that's a zoomed in picture of me when I was about 3. This is me with some of my family, with my grandfather on the left, and with my dad and my grandparents, and my great grandmother on the right. So many years later, I came to Stony Brook to New York for my PhD, and I lived in New York, but I studied hummingbirds in Arizona and in Ecuador. So what I'm really interested in studying about hummingbirds is how they use energy every day. So you guys, you eat food and you get energy to do activities. It's like running and walking around and sitting at school and whatever else. Hummingbirds get energy from eating too, but then they spend it almost immediately. And so they're getting a lot of energy from sugar water, from nectar in plants. And then they're spending it at a really, really high rate. And they're so tiny that they barely have any stored up as fat. So if you don't eat for a few hours, you'll be fine because you have fat stores. You can even not eat for a couple of days and you'll be fine. But they can die in 2 hours if they don't eat, because they're taking in energy, they're barely storing any energy, and they're spending it super quickly. So I wanted to study what do they do with the energy and how do they manage to exist every day in such different places. Like Arizona is in the desert is very different from Ecuador in the mountains. If we wanted to study this in humans, we could put Fitbits on them. I have things that can track my activity, but they would just fall off. There's no Fitbits that are small enough for a hummingbird. So I went to these places, my field sites in Arizona, which look something like this. And the hummingbirds are feeding on tiny little red, let's see if I can use this, tiny little red flowers in the foreground, like you can see here. And also to Ecuador, where I went to the Andes and I spent about a year in the Andes Mountains in Ecuador. We had to carry our stuff up with mules like this, including some really, really heavy batteries because we didn't have electricity at those sites. So we had to carry batteries ourselves to power the our equipment or laptops or whatever we needed to use. And we'd get amazing views like this. So this is called a cloud forest, which isn't that surprising a name. It's usually blanketed with these clouds. And I could wake up to this view every morning, which is amazing. And when you dive down under those clouds, you'll see hummingbirds. Let me see. Oh no, it's paused. Okay. So I don't really need the sound here, so let me just put that. Oh well. Okay, you can still hear me. So hummingbirds, you can see that they're flying super fast. There's so many different colors. There's so much going on, right? Super fighting against each other. There's the one with the white tail flashing. Get away from my territory. Get away from my territory. So they're all trying to get this sugar water, and spending their energy as well. You can barely see their wings, like a blur. So these are some of the flowers in the forest that they get their energy from. The one in the middle is a feeder that we put up, but the ones on the sides are other flowers in the forest, and they tend to be red and orange and purple and really bright colors, because if birds are active during the day, and if they want to find things in a forest, bright colors are a good way to find them. But animals that are active at night, like bats and moths, they often use smell, apart from bats using echolocation, and they feed often from white flowers that smell really nice. So if you see white flowers that smell really nice, they probably have nighttime visitors, and bright colored flowers are usually visited by daytime people, animals. So what, I wonder, do they do at night? Because they can't feed, they can't see, and they're using energy super quickly normally. So if they're not getting any energy in, and I told you that they can die in 2 hours if they don't eat, how do they make it through the whole night, which is like 8 hours or 10 hours? Well, during the day, they're consuming so much energy that if you used energy as quickly as them, you'd need to eat 300 hamburgers every day to survive. And at night, they just want to pass out. So they look kind of like this. They're in a state called torpor. And torpor is something like nighttime hibernation, like what bears can do. It's a state that's way, way deeper than sleep. So we don't call it sleep, we call it torpor. And it's where they can shut their bodies down, allow their bodies to go cold, and save a bunch of energy by doing that. How do we study this? So we catch them with these mist nets, which are very thin nets that you put up between two poles, and hummingbirds usually can't see it very easily, and so they fly into them. And you can gently go and take them out without hurting them. And some of them look like this. This is a beautiful hummingbird in Ecuador. And then one way to study their energy use is to look at their body's temperature. And we can use these thermal cameras or infrared cameras to look at the heat that's coming out of their bodies. So just intuitively, I know that most of you can see that near the eye, it's warmer. The really bright colors, or the really red and yellow, especially the red, is really warm, and the purple and black are cold, which is like near the tail. So this, I'll play this video. This hummingbird is breathing pretty quickly. Its body is at a really warm temperature, similar to what your body's at, maybe even warmer inside. And it's sleeping. Its eyes are closed. Its beak is up, which is how they like to sleep. And then there's this one. And you can barely even see the hummingbird there, right? It's like the same temperature as the outside air. It's purple, which means cold. And it's in that sleeping posture, but it's barely moving at all. It's not breathing. It's breathing only once every 10 seconds or so. If you look really carefully, you saw it twitch. And so this is a video as well, but it's barely moving. So what happens in torpor is that they're allowing their body to get cold. They're becoming kind of like lizards are. Lizards are cold-blooded, right? We say that they're cold-blooded because the outside air decides what their body temperature is. They don't generate heat and maintain a high body temperature themselves. So hummingbirds switch from being like humans on the left, maintaining a high body temperature and breathing fast and having a fast heartbeat, to being kind of like lizards on the right. They can switch from being hot-blooded to cold-blooded. They can also do funny things in their sleep. So I used to watch them for many nights using this thermal camera, and they preen in their sleep, which is like straightening all your feathers out. And they also, this is one of my favorite behaviors in animals, they pee, which is fun to watch. I've just put this on the loop, so the hummingbird isn't peeing again and again and again, but you can see that the pee is pretty hot because it's coming out from their bodies. And it tells us something about how they're functioning. So this animal is clearly not in torpor because its body's processes are still on, and it's still able to make pee and pee. So this bird is definitely not in torpor, and its eye is open if you look carefully. So it's definitely even awake, not even asleep. This is a little still of a peeing hummingbird. So by watching animals in the field and using different ways other than fitness to study these tiny things, we can learn more about how they use energy during the planet. I'm going to switch now. I have a little bit more time, and I'll tell you what I work on here in Alaska. So a lot of the year looks like this. It's really snowy. I'm up here. Let's get this laser pointer going again. I'm all the way up here. This is the mainland US. This is Canada. This would be Florida, if any of you are from there. And this is a zoomed in picture or map of Alaska. Alaska actually spans a really, really wide area. It goes all the way from here to here. These islands are part of Alaska as well. And I'm 4 hours behind East Coast time, but these places could actually be even further. They could be 5 hours behind East Coast time because we're on such a different time zone, being on the other side of the continent. And this is what it looks like most of the winter. And that's me. That's also me. I didn't realize that my hair could freeze, but when I'm breathing out, the water drops stick onto my hair and then they freeze because it's so cold. And I used to, this was a year ago, I used to be really surprised by that, but now I'm a little bit more happy. This is just a few days ago. And I happen to be wearing the same clothes, but I'm much more happy about my hair freezing. It's like a nice photo opportunity now. And I study grass rats, which are rats from Africa, but we're able to use them as a way to understand seasonal depression in humans. So seasonal affective disorder is another word for seasonal depression, and it's abbreviated as SAD because it makes people extremely sad. 10 million Americans get seasonal affective disorder. And what happens is when there's short days, in the winter, the days get shorter, in the summer, the days get longer. That happens more when you're far away from the equator near the poles. And at the equator, it stays usually constant throughout the year. So in places like Fairbanks, Alaska, which is super far north, the winters have really, really short days. And so there's only 4 hours of sunlight where I am. And further north, you have 24 hours of darkness. Imagine if you didn't see the sun at all the time. That's pretty extreme. And so people get very depressed because light seems to be important for us to function normally, natural light, sunlight. But most of the animals that we use to study things that happen to humans are active at night. And it doesn't really make sense to study an animal active at night for studying a response to low light. So we use this other species called the African grass rat. And we have them in these cages where if you look at you can see the pink sheets at the bottom of the cages. Those pink sheets can sense them moving around and sense their breathing rates. And so we can study whether they're asleep or awake. And so this is one half of what's called an actogram. So you can tell the activity patterns of an animal by looking at this. The really bright colors like the yellow is very active, and the blues mean that they're very inactive or asleep. And this whole part of the graph shows the night, this shows the days, and this shows the night again. And so if you look across this way, this is one day, and then this is the next day, and this is the next day, and so on as you go down. So this is how their activity is changing across time with days. So here you can see that it's being inactive, and then the lights come on, and then it starts being active, and then the lights go off, and it stops being active. And this is kind of what you would do if you didn't have lights in your house. When the sun went down, you would go to sleep. When the sun came out, we would wake up. But this is the animals with the short days. So again, it's really dark at night for a longer time, for 20 hours. And then there's light for only 4 hours, and then it goes dark 20 hours again. And the animals were on, before this, I didn't have that part here, but these animals were in the normal rooms with 12 hours of dark and 12 hours of light. But then when they switched, they took some time to adjust. And then they did this very interesting thing. They started being active 12 hours after lights went off, expecting the lights to come on. They were like, hey, okay, it's 12 hours after I went to sleep. Now the lights should come on. And so I'll start being active, but then the lights never came on. And so then they went back to sleep. And then they were active only for those 4 hours when lights were on. And then they went to sleep again. So they have this interesting response to short days. They do sleep more overall. Humans also sleep more when we're exposed to short days. And we're looking at other things that they're doing, like humans tend to binge eat carbohydrates. So we eat a lot of sugar and ice cream and things like that if we're depressed, because it makes us feel better in the short term. And we're seeing if these grass rats do that as well. So we can kind of build a parallel to what humans might be doing when they're depressed. Okay, so I'm gonna end with this. What can you do? Not all of you might want to be scientists, but I think you can all, you might not want to be professional scientists, but I think you can all be scientists anyway by finding things that are interesting to you in your area. Like when I moved here, when I lived in India, the sun would always go above my head in the middle of the day. Noon, I could look up and the sun would be there if it wasn't cloudy. But here, the sun never gets up that high. It just goes along the horizon like this and goes back down. And that's true even in the summer. And this is such a strange thing to me. So watch how high the sun goes up in the middle of the day. Look at the plants around you. See all the different shapes and the sizes, and see whether they're bendy or not. A lot of the plants here can bend over in the winter with the weight of the snow, but then in the summer they come back up. I don't think plants in India could be so bendy. Pay attention to the animals. Do they have a rhythm every day? Are they more active in the morning and then not in the afternoon and more in the evening? That's usually the case for animals that are active during the day. How many squirrels did you see today? you can start to record those things and see patterns in how animals move and exist. And then you could ask, for example, what are animals doing that I do? What are some of the things that we share in common in our days? And the most important thing, I think, is to keep asking a lot of questions. That might annoy your teachers sometimes, but in life, you should just keep asking questions and don't stop. And I would love to take your questions.
All right, awesome. And you're back. Perfect. Well, Anusha, thank you so much for sharing. It's, hummingbirds are such cool little creatures. And until I met you, I didn't even think about when they went pee at night. So, and it's amazing they can shut their bodies down like that and then turn them back on the next day. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And then your research now is pretty darn important because there's a lot of people, when there's less light during the day, they get sad, they get depressed. So it's important that we try to figure out what is happening and then if there's anything we can do about it. So definitely important research. 10 million people is a lot of people. All right, well, let's start meeting some of our classrooms. So we're going to start off, we're going to go to Miss Michael's class. They're joining us in Glenview, Illinois. Let me get that microphone turned on.
Come on up with your question.
How are we doing, Illinois?
Hey, Ray, you guys. Hello. Wow, there you go. You startled us there. Here we go. We've got a couple of girls with questions.
How many rats have you caught
in total?
Okay, so I don't catch these rats. They were caught about 20 years ago for the first time in Africa. Someone was walking around in the field in Africa, and they were like, wait, these rats are active at the daytime. And most of the rats we study are not, they're active at night. So then they decided to bring some of them back and try to breed them and start a colony of rats. And so in Michigan, there's a colony of rats, and we can ask them for some rats, and they sent us some rats so that we could do our study. So we've had about, I think, 75 or 80 rats total. Yeah. Do you like rats?
Would you like 70 or 80 rats? Okay. We've got some more when you come back around to us, Joe.
All right, we'll be back shortly. Awesome, good question to start us off. And actually, Anusha, got me a little curious because, when you bring a species from another country, there's risks involved. You don't want them to get loose and become an invasive species, affect native populations. So I'm sure there's safeguards that you have in place to try and make sure they stay where you want them.
Oh yeah, it's super hard to get them in. You have to go through a lot of bureaucratic protocols, and you have to quarantine the animals. Even if you want to take your dog to another country, usually, or your cat, you'd have to keep it in isolation at a center or something for a few weeks to make sure that it doesn't have diseases. It'll have to go through all these health checkups. And then once you bring it in, there's a lot of protocols and paperwork that we have to submit to this committee in our institution. Each institution has one, and it's called an animal care committee. And you have to tell them exactly how you're going to handle this animal, what you're going to feed them every day, how many times you're going to feed them, how many times you're going to change their cages. And it's a facility which I need this like fancy RFID tracking ID card. So every time I swipe into any door, they know where I am. So it's very restricted access, and you need to get like clearance to be able to go into that building even. And then they're in rooms, inside buildings, there's no way those animals are getting out unless we want them to.
All right, awesome. We're going to visit another classroom. This time we're going to go to the group hanging out with Mrs. Burkett. They are in Sterling, Virginia, and it's a big group of classrooms that got together, and we almost didn't have them today. Their power was out this morning, but it came back on. So Mrs. Burkett, I'm just going to need you to unmute for me because you had to pop back in. So you've got mute control right now. Oh, they blinked out. We'll get back to them when they pop back in. I'll try and be quick and catch their microphone. While we wait for them, let's go to Mrs. Ball's group in Goderich, Ontario. Let's get that microphone turned on. There we go. How are we doing, boys and girls?
How are you doing? Good. We're pretty quiet over here today, but I always like to hear how your explorers got to where they are. So could Anusha tell us a bit about how she ended up in the various places she's been?
Thank you. I think that's a useful question. I ask that to a lot of people who are more senior than me because it helps to see what that path is. I did a lot of my schooling in India. I lived in the US for a few years, but I studied biology in the 11th and 12th grades. And then I wanted to be a psychiatrist, but that didn't work out. I didn't clear the medical entrance exams because as soon as you finish high school, you have to do the medical degree in India. It's not like you have to do undergrad first and then a medical degree. So then I decided to study animal behavior instead of human behavior. So I took zoology in my undergrad. And then I did my master's in ecology and environmental sciences. And then I took a year's break and I studied these giant birds in India called hornbills for my master's thesis and how they choose nest sites in giant trees. And then I came to the US for my PhD and I finished that about a year ago. So now I do what's called a postdoc, which is like in between a PhD and becoming a professor. And I'll do another postdoc soon, and then I'll apply for becoming a professor or apply for faculty positions in India.
All right. And I think that's a really cool thing to share, is that there's no right or wrong way to become a scientist or to get interested in something. Everybody's got a different path. It's going to twist, it's going to turn. Things are going to go right. Things aren't going to go the way you planned. You might start out in one thing, fall in love with something else. So there's no right or wrong way to get into science. And I think that's pretty cool. And we always get to hear those different stories.
And you can usually go into something else. Like every decision you make isn't the final one that you're going to have to stick to for the rest of your life. I think we think that every time we enter a new phase. And we're like, if I don't choose the perfectly correct college now and the perfectly right major, then everything's going to be ruined forever. That's not true. You can always switch back and forth. And it's actually more valuable sometimes to have people with different backgrounds in your field. Like I think if engineers go study engineering and then come and do ecology, they could be so useful to us. Or do math and statistics and then come and do ecology. Those kind of, that mixing is super useful.
All right. I think we have our class back in Sterling, Virginia. Looks like 3 classes together hanging out with us. How are we doing, boys and girls in Virginia? All right. I'm glad the power is back on. Let's get a question or two in just in case it happens again.
Come on, come on over here. Come up here. Okay, Eva, quickly come over. Right here in front of this. Introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Eva. When the hummingbirds are breathing, when they slow down, like, is it for actually like 10 seconds or is it like sometimes less, sometimes more?
That's a very good question. So yeah, usually they're breathing at, I think it's 300 breaths a minute. It's a lot of breaths in a minute. And then they slow down. And I use that as an example because one of the videos, like the first time it happened is when I really, really noticed it. And I was like sitting and counting the number of seconds. And this one hummingbird didn't breathe for 10 seconds. And then it took 4 deep breaths. It was like, and then it didn't breathe for 10 seconds and kept doing that when it was in torpor. But it varies. Whenever you hear a number like that, it's never the same across all the individuals. If I counted how fast you breathe versus how fast he breathes versus how fast she breathes, it's going to be slightly different. So it's the same with hummingbirds when they're in torpor. And it depends on how cold they are. It depends on how much energy they're spending, how quickly. So it does vary.
Yeah, it's still pretty wild though to go from say 300 breaths a minute down to maybe like 5 or 6 in a minute. That's quite a slowdown.
Yeah.
Our group in Virginia, why don't you guys squeeze one more in if you have it, just in case. We never know what the power is going to do.
Okay. All right. Introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Diana.
Hi, Diana.
And my question is that how can hummingbirds go backwards?
That's a very good question. So hummingbirds are, for those of you who haven't heard about this, they are the only birds that can go in like every direction. They can go hover in place. They can go backwards and forwards and up and down. And they're like ninjas when they're flying. If you see slow-mo videos of them, I should start including that in my talk. Slow-mo's videos of them. They can do like incredible things. And one of the reasons is because their wings are designed a little bit differently from other birds. So most birds flap their wings up and down. If you watch them, you see that they're just doing that. But hummingbirds are able to do this front and back thing. So they're able to hover in place. And it's really expensive energy-wise to do that. But it allows them to hover and feed on really delicate flowers. And it also allows them to go backwards pretty easily because it's just moving more this way than that way. And then they're able to go upside down as well.
All right, pretty awesome. Mrs. Gerard's group in Belmont are hanging out with us right now. Let me get their microphone turned on. There it is. How we doing, girls?
Good. Oh, okay. So, hi. My question is, since you are in Alaska, like, how have you dealt with seasonal depression if you've like encountered it?
I have a whole other talk for that, but so I actually have found the winters not so bad. I went away for actually very close to Sterling, Virginia for the winter, and then for a month in the winter, and then I came back. But in the summer, everyone was away. It was light all the time, and I felt like I should be working all the time, and I felt guilty for not working all the time. And so I found the summer harder than the winter. But it was really confusing because it's the opposite of what I should be feeling. So I started collecting data on myself. I started recording my mood twice a day with an app. And I started I've been collecting data for a long time on how I use my time to see, like, am I really not working hard enough? And I was working hard. I was working on maybe the unimportant things. But it really helped me identify that, okay, I need to keep getting exercise. I need to go salsa dancing, which is what I love doing. I need to keep talking to my family and to my friends. Just like it helped me troubleshoot, basically. I kept changing a few things and seeing what happened in my mood and figuring out what I needed to stay happy. But when I moved here, it was kind of funny that I'm a tropical animal. I'm from the tropics, like the grass rats are, and I was going to move to this extreme environment and study seasonal depression. I was like, maybe I can study myself too, and I did.
All right, very cool. Let's go back to Mrs. Michael's class, or Miss Michael's class, and see if they have another question for us.
Okay, Amina, come on up. Oh, Amina, go ahead.
When you try to put the Fitbits on the hummingbirds, wouldn't it hurt the hummingbirds because they're heavy? The Fitbits are heavy.
That's why we can't do that. Yeah. So the Fitbits would never work on a hummingbird. If someone made a Fitbit small enough, we could attach it to their legs. So there are these, it's called banding, when you can put this tiny little aluminum band with a number on it on a bird's leg. And then, so there's these people who do that all the time. And then if you find a hummingbird, you'll know where it came from because it has a unique number on it. So we have to be very careful that it weighs very little. So if someone made something like a Fitbit for a hummingbird, it would be very, very small and very, very light, and it wouldn't slow them down or hurt them in any way. But we don't have that yet. We can't do that.
Yes, that would be quite a technological advancement to get something that small.
Thank you.
Very cool. Do you guys have another one while we're here?
Amelia, did you have one? Anybody have one while we're here? I think not right now. Thank you.
That's okay. We can check towards the end. I do want to grab one from online. So Ms. Gonzalez's group is joining us, 5th grader from San Antonio, Texas. And they're wondering about other things that fascinate you about animals, maybe some other energy things you've learned.
Oh, well, there's a lot of people, like I said in my lab, study ground squirrels. So they study Arctic ground squirrels, which live even further north in Alaska. And they experience so much of darkness and also so much snow that they can't even feed during the winter and get enough energy to stay alive. So instead, they hibernate for 8 months in a year. They're underground in burrows, turning their bodies off, sometimes going as low as -5 degrees Celsius, which is cold. And then they warm themselves back up in the summer and have babies and eat a lot and then go back into hibernation for 8 months. So they have really drastic energy needs, and that's another interesting one. Another one that I really like is thinking about how energy needs change with animals size. So if you look at how much energy a mouse needs versus how much energy an elephant needs, it's clearly very different. The elephant needs overall more energy. But if you look per kilogram or per gram or per pound of the animal, the mouse needs a lot more than the elephant. Because it's easier for the elephant to keep heat in itself than a mouse. The mouse keeps losing heat, so it takes energy to make more heat and to maintain its body in every way. So yeah, it's interesting to see how energy needs change with size and with time and in any other way that you can think.
All right, very cool. Ms. Ball's class in Goddard, do you guys have another question?
Yeah, we wondered what made Anusha want to study seasonal affective disorder, and also how she balances sort of her social life with her work life.
That's a difficult question. But how I chose to study it, I didn't initially. I came to this place thinking that I would study seasonal depression for half the time and study the hibernating ground squirrels for half the time, because I was really interested, after studying the hummingbirds and torpor, in what people who study mammals know about hibernation and torpor, because they're very similar things. But it just didn't work out the same way. There's another person who's working on the squirrels, so I'm working only on the rats. But I was interested in the seasonal depression because there's more of a link to humans directly, and I wanted to experience a little bit of that as well. I think it's useful to get some skills in the biomedical kind of field. Yeah, I look at all of these experiences kind of as learning new skills. Like, what can I learn that I don't know how to do yet? And that's more important to me in some ways than which animal I'm studying. Like, what other questions are interesting to me? It is interesting to study seasonal depression. I was interested in psychiatry at some point, and so I'm interested in how humans think and animals think. And I think those are relationships that all kind of come together eventually. Even though I wanted to do the psychiatry thing like 10 years ago now, it's all circled back eventually to what I got the opportunity to do. And my work-life balance, I don't know, I just do a lot of stuff that's interesting to me. I'm taking a metalworking class now, so I'm learning how to make metal jewelry. I go salsa dancing whenever I can. In Fairbanks, it's not that often. But every time I travel anywhere else, I go salsa dancing quite a bit. I read books. I invite friends over and we play games. I think it's important to me to have a social life for sure. So I do spend time doing that.
All right. Quick question from online from Mrs. Lackey's group hanging out with us in New Jersey. They're wondering, since hummingbirds fly so fast, how do they slow themselves down? Or can they stop easily, or do they need some space?
I wonder if that means from hovering to sitting down or hovering to torpor. I'm assuming hovering to torpor.
I don't know. I'm wondering, just from the question, they fly so fast.
Mm-hmm.
How do they slow themselves down to a stop? I'm wondering if they're just hitting the brakes. Like,
yeah. So people have studied them, like they have these like chambers, and the hummingbirds are feeding from a little feeder, and they startle them. They like push something closer to them. It's not hurting them at all. But the hummingbirds, they test how quickly the hummingbirds are able to respond. And they're able to respond really, really quickly. I think they have so much fine control over their bodies that that they're able to, their muscles work really fast. Their brain works super fast. Like, their brain is already telling their wings when to move back when it's just started moving forward. And so they're planning way ahead really quickly. And I think that's part of what helps them switch.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, they're such precise flyers. I mean, it's amazing to watch them in action. It's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
Sterling, Virginia, do you guys have one more for us? The power is holding.
Hi, I'm Sydney, and what kind of food for hummingbirds give them the most energy?
That's a good question, Sydney. So they usually feed on this sugar water or nectar from plants. They can also get some energy from insects and protein from insects, especially when they're trying to raise babies. They eat a lot of insects so that their babies can grow with the protein that they feed them. But if you want to get the most energy, it's from sugar. because you're the most efficient at making energy out of sugar compared to fat or proteins.
All right, and we'll visit Mrs. Gerard's group again. Your microphone is on.
Hi, I'm Lily. And what types of treatments are being developed to try and cure seasonal depression?
Hi, Lily. That's a good question. So one of them is what's called a light box. So my aunt gave me this. I'm going to put it on. It's going to be super bright. Yeah, so it gives you kind of the same intensity of light that sunlight would give you in the same wavelengths, except for the harmful UV. They've taken that out, but they put everything else in there. So you're supposed to expose yourself to that like 15 minutes a day in the beginning of the day. And that's supposed to help set your daily rhythm because you're not getting that stimulus otherwise. So this is one of the treatments, and also having bright light versus dim light inside the house could help. We're also studying what happens to bacteria in the gut, because that's really like people who are depressed versus people who are not often have very different bacteria in their gut, or gut microbiomes as it's called. And so we're trying to see in the grass rats if there's changes with light in the gut microbiome. And then you can treat that in some ways. You can like give them certain probiotics or do something to help change their gut microbiome, for example. That's not a thing yet. But light is one of the most effective things. And then there's some stimulants, like there's things that affect serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter in your brain. You can change how serotonin levels are and then change how people respond to depression, but it takes time.
All right, very cool. Well, Anusha, thank you so much for hanging out with us today, all the way from Fairbanks. Classrooms, you guys are awesome as usual. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks to the classrooms on YouTube for sending in some questions. There were definitely some well thought out questions today, so that was awesome. Sure. And yeah, that was another great addition to our Awesome Women in STEM event this month. You're doing some awesome work. You've been amazing places. And thanks for sharing a little bit of that with us today.
Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Joe.
All right. Well, the last thing I'll do is unmute the microphones, boys and girls. A big goodbye and thank you all the way to Alaska. All right. Awesome work, everyone. You never let us down. Thanks so much for hanging out today. We look forward to seeing you in more events this month. We've got something like 50 events with amazing women in science and STEM all month long. So sign up for some more and we'll see your classrooms again soon. So thanks, everyone. And we're signing off for today.